Hello and welcome to today's interview. Today we'll be working with transform drugs and the discussion of legalising drugs and how to. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi, I'm Esther and I'm the Research Policy Officer at Transform Drug Policy Foundation. We're a charity think tank working in Bristol on campaigning for the legal regulation of drugs.
Excellent. So obviously, as I said, I've read the most recent book sort of thing that you wrote. So the main first question is why? Why do you think that drugs, or not, you know what I mean, should be legalised?
Sure. So recent book was How to Regulate Stimulants, which worked on what we had previously released, which was a blueprint to how to legally regulate drugs. And it's all founded in the idea that there's growing consensus that the war on drugs that's been going since 1961 is just not working. And the idea of a drug-free world is not possible, and it's just causing greater harms than good. And the only other solution is to legally regulate drugs to reduce harm in use and to look after the most marginalized and vulnerable people in our society.
Yeah, I was reading it, and I agree with that, to be fair, because obviously when you have street drugs, they're not regulated and all sorts of chemicals, and there's a lot of issues with those drugs. And so in the book, they spoke about the different types of vending. So obviously, you had like on a licensed premises, such as a pub and pharmacies. So what do you think would be the best option, or would you use like a few of those options?
Yeah, so I think that is a great question. It's exactly what we try to address, is that there is no one size fits all for the retail of drugs. And what we try to achieve and produce in the How to Regulate Stimulants book is a programmatic approach that really considers the different risk types to drugs and then appropriately creates different license and retail models for the individual drugs. So, for example, I think cocaine's a really good example of that because you can have it in very different forms, right from consumption of coca leaf tea to crack cocaine, and it's very different risk profiles for any and cocaine powder. So for those three different things, and we would say for that coca leaf tea is considered a lower risk, so it would need a less stringent retail model. Whereas cocaine powder, we would suggest would need to be within a pharmaceutical sales type retail, and something such as crack cocaine, which has got a high amount of harm associated with its use. We don't actually advocate any retail model for it, but rather a harm reduction model to reduce use and to offer treatment to users.
Yeah, so I get what you're saying. So, for example, the tea may be served in a cafe, whereas the cocaine powder would be from the pharmacies.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. When I was reading as well, I liked the idea that the money made from drug legalisation would be then put into the communities affected, and I think that's a really good. That's really important. So, what sort of help and programs would you like to see introduced after?
Oh, I think that's quite a broad question. I think it's the founding principle to redirect tax revenue into particularly just to readdress the harms that people have experienced from prohibition is really important. And there are various different models, and I think it depends on region and community what is most appropriate and how to do it. The US is a really great example because they've already been doing these things with cannabis legal regulation and specifically earmarking tax revenue from cannabis to create drug treatment services or drugs education. So specifically focusing on drug education and services would be a good way of dealing with it so that there is an earmark for this issue.
Um, yeah, I'd agree with that. So like, I don't know. Obviously, I'm not sure if you. I don't know. But so, how would you go about it? So, for example, obviously, like, things like cocaine can be an addictive substance. So, if you have a repeat customer, are they like sort of like, when do you like begin to maybe like is there steps in place to notice that I don't know maybe they're coming a bit too often and like whatnot? And is
Yeah,
there like issues.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, because currently, if someone is accessing cocaine, they're accessing it through the illegal drugs market. So that is a local dealer, and there is no recourse to healthcare. You're not getting any. You're not engaging in opportunities to talk about your use, whether it is becoming problematic. The idea of having cocaine sold in a pharmacy model is that the retailers, the people working within the pharmacy type outlets, would be trained to also provide this advice, so that when you are coming up to the person in the pharmacy style outlet and purchasing your cocaine, you will also be receiving any sort of harm reduction advice, offers of whether a purchaser may want to talk about their use. So it's really like drastically increases the engagement between the user and opens up opportunity for any sort of health wraparound service that they might want to access.
And so what do you think the positives from the legalisation? What would come of it positive wise?
I think that's really broad ranging. I mean, prohibition has had such a devastating effect on people, and it's so far ranging from users to people entrapped in the supply side or marginalized communities growing coca, for example, suffering great violences in the regions that they work. It's so broad reaching that you could name lots of things, but I think it's really fundamental that we remember that it's going to save lives. If you have a safe access and supply, so the users will have safe access. They will be reducing their own harm, to actually significantly improving the welfare of people within the supply chain, particularly. I think something like Bolivia is a really good example of that element of it, where they have legally regulated production of coca, used as coca tea, and it has significantly improved the enfranchisement and economic agency of coca growing communities in Bolivia. Yeah, there's multitudes of effects.
Yeah, I agree. And so in regards to, obviously this is the opposite now, so negatives, is there anything that really stands out? Because apart from to me, apart from the obvious things of obviously addiction and whatnot that already happens, I can't see any added negatives through legalisation.
Yeah, I think the positives of legal regulation are really compelling, and it's really difficult to argue against them. There are some elements that it's particularly around ensuring social justice and equity within a legally regulated model, and that means that, as well as ensuring that individuals who have been negatively affected by the war on the prohibition and drug policies are redressed in legally regulated models, be that by using tax revenue to fund drug treatment services, drug education work, but also such as cannabis, involving them in the newly legally regulated market, or within coca, involving them in the new legally regulated market as part of the production and supply. I think we need to be wary of multinational companies, and ensuring that there isn't a grasp by greater profit, and that the benefits and the revenue that comes from the legally regulated market is equally distributed to those who deserve it, as well as up top.
Well, you just answered my next question, which is going to be, of course, it has to be owned by the government and nationalised in order to put the money back in. So yeah, so I was going to ask, so it's important to keep it away from big pharma, as you will, and whatnot, who would rather use it for profit and then not help the community, which obviously.
Yeah, absolutely, and there can be a place within production, certainly, but yeah, there need to be checks and regulations to ensure that it doesn't become monopolized by Big Pharma, for example, or other companies.
Yeah, definitely. Something I was thinking about as well with this is that through the legalisation of drugs, you create a whole new job market. And so my point, sort of what I'm getting at is that perhaps cannabis farmers now who are doing it illegally then can transfer through to a legal job. Do you see
Yeah,
that? See that as being like a thing, or
I think there has been. I mean, I'm not entirely sure. We don't want the legally regulated market to be another place where organized criminal groups are able to operate. Because the whole argument is that we want to take money out of organized crime. But there are certainly low-level playing actors who could be involved, people who have, usually due to their marginalization within society, have become involved at a low level within the illegal drug market, who perhaps could be involved in the legal market. And there have been discussions around the involvement of low-level drug dealers within the newly legally regulated market. There's been some work on that, particularly in the US. So it's not saying that it totally depends on the magnitude of and the effects of how someone's been growing cannabis. The other idea is that you could have an allowance for personal growth, growing your own personal amount of cannabis at home, which is the other element of it, which exists in some of the legally regulated models in the US and Canada.
that is actually a good point about. So, like, for example, if you were, let's say, marijuana was legal, do you have any idea on the limits for like how much ecstasy a person can have on their persons, etc.?
So there's different elements of on your person and carrying versus being able to access at a pharmaceutical style outlet, then obviously it's very different for cannabis. I can't quite remember what the different various personal growth allowances are that already exist in the in the US and in Canada. I think it's something like this would be total guesswork, like 2 to 3 plants or five plants, something like that. In terms of ensuring that you're not purchasing or carrying too much, or how much you're allowed to with MDMA, cocaine, etc., is there would be rationed purchase amounts at pharmaceuticals, so that you would say be able to buy 130-gram a dose of MDMA or cocaine, something like that.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, and obviously, so like for example, an MDMA pill, I can only assume it'd be worked out based on things such as height and weight. So there's like a full scientific approach towards the doses and how much you can have, etc.
I mean, yeah, I don't think we've really got that far in trying to establish what we propose for our legally regulated market, but that would be a true ideal, is to ensure that the doses work exactly for that individual. That is a great, safe way of using drugs, for sure.
I quite like the idea of the packages as well. You've took, so like for plain packaging like cigarettes, so it isn't necessarily, you're not necessarily encouraging drug use, rather more just keep it to you. And I think that is quite a good idea and definitely something that needs to be used as well.
Yeah. It was actually a really interesting discussion as we went through the process of designing the packaging, because exactly like you said, we're not encouraging drug use, we're encouraging safe drug use, but we don't want to create marketing and branding around these drugs, because they do still carry a risk to use, and to allow sort of unchecked marketing and branding that exists in, I mean, another drug, the alcohol industry, is not a line that we want to take at all. So we really did want to err on more side, exactly like you said, the tobacco type plain packaging that doesn't distinguish between brands. There is no branding. That was really important.
I don't have much else to ask. Is there anything you'd like to add? Or...
I guess there are a couple of things. I think as well as what we've just talked about, there's a huge amount of stuff around harm reduction as well, and how the important roots of that, and actually really just remembering right now that we have currently it's the 50th year of the Misuse of Drugs Act, which is the British Drugs Act, that controls drugs and illegal drugs in the UK, and it's just grossly outdated. And this is really the time. If the time is not now, when is the time to start talking about redressing that and changing things? We've got these proposals, as you can see, and we need to have a totally different approach to drug policy, which is health-led, and it protects human rights and ensures social justice. And currently, the drug policies are totally failing to do that.
I agree. It's often, for example, if someone's addicted to crack cocaine, they're often demonised, rather than if someone's an alcoholic, there's often more support and help for that. It's sort of looked at as like a bad thing when it's not necessarily. So I do.
I completely agree. The stigma around drug users is really debilitating and often inhibits access to treatment or support or any of the other elements that you may need to manage your drug use. Definitely.
Yeah. That's it, I think, unless you've got anything else.
No, just yeah, Transform Drug Policy Foundation is the name, and we also have our campaign arm, which is Anyone's Child, which I think I should just probably mention for anyone interested, and that's it's a group of families who work together to campaign against current drug policy after having been severely negatively affected by drug laws.
Well, I'll make sure to leave both that and Transform. I'll link them both.
Yeah, so that would be brilliant. Yeah, cool.
Thanks for your time.
Yeah, thanks. You're welcome. Chat.
Yeah. That is the end of today's talk. As I said, I'll leave the links to Anyone's Child and Transform Drugs down below, and obviously go like my Facebook page. That'll be down below as well. Cheers.